So we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of African fashion, and particularly Black Dandyism, in the context of what we know will be happening next Monday at the Met Gala, but also in the sort of deeper narrative of what it means to tell stories in this new African world. From Zulu Swenkas to the world-renowned Congolese sapeurs, who we were just hearing about, African sartorialists have long claimed, imagined, and redesigned what might otherwise have been Western fashion as tools of African power, self-expression, and self-conception. Our conversation today will bring together leading scholars of African art and culture, the history of the suit, and visual and cultural histories of the African diaspora to explore dandyism in dialogue with some of the leading designers from the African diaspora and the African continent today. We're talking about Black Dandyism from within the African gaze and in contemporary art and fashion markets. We know that you're here as much for the catwalk as you are for the conversation, so we'll cover a lot of territory in relatively short time, but we hope that you get a better understanding of how fashion movements transcend borders and eras, how African designers, tailors, and dressers have influenced Western trends and global fashion preferences, and the ancestral through lines that echo across both sides of the Atlantic, tying together the politics and pleasures of dress and adornment in Africa and globally. What might the future of Black Dandyism hold when Africa takes its place on the world stage in the African century? Join us in the next 40 minutes as I introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce David Tlale. Considered a pioneer of South African design, David's eponymous label is known for its convention-defying drama, his ready-to-wear and couture pieces serving as flamboyant interpretations of contemporary staples. The namesake brand, David Tlale, launched in 2003, and by 2009, its designer was awarded the Fashion Designer of the Year award at the African Fashion Awards in Johannesburg. Over the years, David has built a reputation for himself as one of South Africa's most reputable players, becoming a household name whose work has influenced a new generation of up-and-coming talent. After making his debut at South African Fashion Week in 2002, David was awarded the coveted Elle New Talent Award, and in 2007 presented at Paris Fashion Week. There he showed off a range boasting expert craftsmanship and attention to detail. His array of bold yet elegant designs channels global perceptions of African luxury. He was also the first of his South African contemporaries to showcase solo at New York Fashion Week in 2012. Thanks to a bold aesthetic that challenges traditional design cliches and an unpredictable use of colors and textures, David's designs impart an unapologetic self-expression that tells a rich story of African innovation. A proud supporter of local design talent, David is also adamant that African designers express their authentic selves on the runways. "It's not my vision to compete with Dolce & Gabbana or Armani," he told online magazine Kings and Queens. "They are doing them, and we are coming with a new story." He's also made it a firm priority to help nurture the new generation of South African design talent, and in 2017 launched a televised search for the next big thing called The Intern by David Tlale. Next, I want to welcome Dr. Chloe Chapin. Chloe is a designer and a scholar obsessed with the relationship between clothing and identity. She received her PhD in American Studies from Harvard in 2023 and holds master's degrees in history, also from Harvard, fashion and textile studies from FIT, and costume design from the Yale Drama School. As a theatrical costume designer for over 20 years before going back to graduate school, Chloe has costumed Broadway musicals, opera, Shakespeare, contemporary dramas, and downtown experimental theater. She has taught fashion history, costume design, gender studies, and anthropology at Harvard University, FIT, Parsons, and Reed College. Chloe is a former Fulbright scholar and has held fellowships at the Smithsonian, Mount Vernon, and Monticello, and she currently works in the Teaching Center at Harvard. Her first book, Suits: The Making of Modern Men, is slated to come out in 2026 with Oxford University Press. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Marius Kothor. Marius is a historian of 20th century West Africa, Her work examines the transnational political and economic lives of Togolese women merchants. She has published widely in academic and popular outlets, including the American Historical Review, Oxford Encyclopedia of African History, and the New York Times, Africa as a Country and Black Perspectives. She's currently working on a book titled Money in the Bank, Votes in the Bag, The Rise and Fall of West Africa's Merchant Queens. This monograph examines how a group of Togolese women textile merchants, known as the Nana Bens, transformed the economic and political landscape of 20th century West Africa. Dr. Kothor received her PhD from the Department of History at Yale University and is a postdoctoral fellow and assistant professor in women, gender, and sexuality at Harvard University. Next, I'd like to introduce our second fashion designer on the panel, Omar Salam. Omar is the visionary founder of Sukaina, a global luxury fashion brand celebrated for its innovation, exceptional craftsmanship, and modern elegance. With over 15 years of industry experience, including 5 years in retail and management, Omar refined his expertise in fashion operations and customer engagement, establishing the groundwork for his distinct approach to design and leadership. Prior to establishing Sukaina, Omar held significant roles as visual director at Sonia Rykiel and Christian LaCroix, where he cultivated compelling visual narratives and brand identities. His unique combination of creative artistry, strategic vision, and profound dedication to sustainability has positioned Sukaina as a leader in contemporary fashion. In recognition of his impact, Omar was inducted into the Kent State Fashion Museum Hall of Fame. Furthermore, in 2022, he was named a CFDA Fashion Fund beneficiary, underscoring his influence and contribution to the future of the fashion industry. And finally, the grand doyen of the African contemporary art world, Touria El Glaoui. Touria is the founding director of the leading international art fair, 154 Contemporary African Art Fair, which takes place biannually in London and New York. Born and raised in Morocco, El Glaoui completed her education in New York before beginning a career in the banking industry as a wealth management consultant. After 10 years, she relocated to London, where prior to initiating 154 in 2013, she occupied various business development positions in the Middle East and Africa. Parallel to her career, Touria has organized and co-curated exhibitions of her father's work, Moroccan artist Hassan El Glaoui, in London and Morocco. She has spoken widely and chaired numerous discussions on contemporary African art and women in leadership at international organizations. In 2016, Touria was listed among the 100 most powerful women in Africa by Forbes magazine. She was amongst the 50 most powerful women in Africa by Jeune Afrique in 2015, and among the 100 most influential Africans in business by New African in 2015. Welcome, Touria. So as you can tell, we have an amazing group. We would love to talk all day, and we get to talk this evening, but we'll try to give you the highlights here. I wanted to begin with you, David, and I was hoping that you can give us, as an insider who's helped shape the African fashion industry and particularly cultivated young talent. Africa is the youthful continent. We've talked about the impact it will have in the future of the 21st century. How do you see how the fashion industry has changed over your career, and what do you anticipate in terms of its impact going forward?
Wow. First of all, I'd like to say thank you, Dr. Precious, for having us here, and AFI making this day possible on this amazing platform. Thank you. I believe as a creative originating from South Africa, our heritage and traditions, they play a major role. I was raised and born in Vosloorus, which is east of Johannesburg, and in a township you are on a daily basis surrounded by culture, by beauty and adornment. And I remember very well from my father's side, my uncle, I called him a super fashionista then. We didn't have the word dandy because he was a technician, and on a daily basis he was always in a three-piece suit and a tie, distressed leather bag where he kept his tools, and I was always attracted and just like following him around. I don't know why, but now that I'm older, I realize it is a creative bug that was in me. Fast forward, my other uncle, who was a landscape painter, I spent so much time with him, and all these things, I start reflecting on them now, and I'm just reflecting on the vast, I'll say, heritage and beauty that I saw while I was still a child, and today it plays a major role in my creativity. And because of our upbringing in South Africa, when we went through apartheid and into democracy, before colonization happened and everything else, we saw how fashion and, I would say, adornment played a major role. I was talking the other day with someone who was interviewing me to say, dressing up is not just slapping on clothes on yourself. It's a powerful statement that you put. And men in the 18th century, we remember how adornment was like their way to go. From hair, makeup, and heels. Until Queen Elizabeth decided that no man will be seen in makeup and heels. And we started seeing revolution of men's wardrobe over the years. And coming fast forward, in the 40s, we saw how people just used clothing as armor and protecting themselves after the First World War. And fast forward, we started seeing the 60s and the 80s. And then in South Africa, as we got into our dispensation of democracy, we started seeing people being proud to be seen wearing traditional clothing, which is beautifully tailored. And then we did not realize that's a powerful industry, which is the business of fashion. We just have a tailor. I'm gonna go to my tailor just to make my clothes, but that's bespoke, that's business, that leads to the whole value chain of fashion. So when I grew up in South Africa, I realized, I remember when I went to fashion school in 1994, we started seeing South Africans being proud. First of all, our late president, Nelson Mandela, pushed aside a typical suit to go to parliament or anything and wearing a Madiba shirt, made it a phenomenon globally. And then we started seeing men following suit, and then the trend started growing. And today, people get married in their traditional attires, and it's the most beautiful thing, more than anything else. And we can touch on so many points, and I don't think we have enough time to unpack the whole conversation, but I'm just saying, inspiration is something that happens when we are not paying attention. At a later stage, we reflect on it and realize what inspired you. When you were not, when you still run, I'm looking at it myself, when I was running around my uncles, I was not paying attention to what's happening. And today, I know exactly what has made me and shaped me to be who I am. I grew up from a Christian family where every Sunday we go to church, and there was Sunday's best, and you had to look the part. Even if you did not have much in your family, but Sunday you had to pull out the best from our moms with the big hats, our dads and uncles and everybody else. A suit, a tie was a code of the day. So those things, they had a direct impact of shaping fashion that is made in Africa. I'm off, kind of like we need to walk away from the statement African fashion. It's fashion that's made in Africa, served to the world. It's very important because that's where tradition, culture, trends stem from, and we serve it to the world.
Thank you so much. You set up beautifully the next two women I want to come to. So I'll start with you, Chloe. I mean, you've just heard David kind of invoking some of that potted history of the suit. You've been investigating the history of the suit as a site of performance, masculinity, power. Can you share with us what you've learned and how we might think about dandyism through the historian's perspective?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm kind of the outlier because I don't work on African fashion, but I do work on the suit, and I think it is always important to keep the suit in mind when we're thinking about fashion, because it's often what fashion is defined against. I was very interested to hear words like joy, exuberance, individuality, creativity. And when we hear those words in relationship to Black Dandyism, I think sometimes it's talked about in relationship to poverty or oppression, but it's also talked about in relationship to the suit. So when I'm talking about the suit, I'm talking about the boring suit, the suit that is not Black Dandyism. You know what I mean, right? And so I think that the power of that boring suit is important for three reasons, because it is related to, we associate the suit and that visual power with rationality, democracy, and modernity. So you can tell that the suit is rational because it's plain and boring. And you can tell that it's democratic because it all looks the same, right? There's none of that individuality that is what Black Dandyism is about. And we think of it as being modern because it's rational and enlightened and democratic. So there's this harnessing of this visual theme to this idea of rationality, modernity, democracy. But it's also associated with masculinity, with Westernness, and with whiteness. And so when women wear suits, it's always seen as borrowed power. When Black men wear suits, especially that boring suit, it is often seen as a kind of appropriation, putting on a costume of rationality, and sort of a cerebralness, right, that isn't as much focused on the body as we see so many designers exploring in African fashion. And so that's, I think, the way that I think about this suit is that it is the reasons why it came to symbolize these things was because of the changing attitudes of the time. You mentioned the 18th century. So what I look at is the way that suits changed between the American Revolution and the Civil War. I call it the shift from peacocks to penguins. So why did that happen? I think, obviously it was happening all around the Western world, but I really think that the American story of the suit has been undervalued. The way that I see it is that the founding fathers, who were trying desperately to convince the world that they were as respectable and civilized as the Europeans were. So they used the suit as a way to say, we're doing something different here with democracy in America. And so they said the suit shows how we believe in equality and liberty and liberation, revolution. But they also defined it as white, Western, and masculine. So I think it is useful to keep in mind that the suit was created as a form of non-fashion and sort of allowed white not just allowed, but restrained white masculinity outside of fashion and any kind of adornment. So when we think about every other kind of fashion, women's fashion, the fashion of non-Western, non-white people, it's always useful to think about what we're defining it in opposition against, this thing that has this strange, cerebral, rational, democratic power.
I think that really captures the kind of coloniality and colonial mentality that sought to restrict African access to that type of expression. But Marius, I want to come to you because you look at something that not only subverts that power, but actually just rejects it and replaces it with a different powerful aesthetic entirely. Can you share with us a little bit about the Nana Bands? Who were they? What were they building on? What were these transnational, textile, colonial, but also deeply African networks of trade that they were transforming for the post-independence era in Togo?
Thank you, Zoe, for that great question. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Dr. Precious, am I getting it right? And for the invitation. I'm happy to be here to share a little bit about my work because right now I'm actually writing a book about the Nana Bands, so this is what I think about all day, every day. So the book I'm writing looks at this group of women merchants in Togo who began their enterprise in selling Dutch wax textiles primarily by first importing them from the Gold Coast colony, which is now Ghana, in the city of Accra, and then bringing it into Lomé, where they set up a distribution network that distributed these textiles throughout West and Central Africa. By the 1960s, however, they were able to basically work outside of Accra and work with European manufacturers, especially the Dutch company Vlisco, to import these textiles directly from the Netherlands into Lomé and then distributed it throughout West and Central Africa, so places as far as Kinshasa. People were coming to Lomé to buy their textiles specifically from the Nana Bands. So because of their monopoly on the textile trade, the Nana Bands became so wealthy that they were the first people to import the Mercedes-Benz into Togo, which is how they got their name, the Nana Bands. So my project, the book I'm writing, looks at the ways that these women use the economic resources that they gained from selling these European manufactured textiles in order to shape Togo's decolonization movement and then later the establishment of a military dictatorship. So it's a really complicated story about women's involvement in politics, but central to that story is how the aesthetics of the Dutch waxed cloth became a powerful way for these women to communicate ideas about beauty and aesthetics, but also about political power, and how they use the tailoring of these textiles on their own bodies and on the bodies of the nation at large in order to communicate ideas about African authenticity and about nationalism. And one of the arguments that I make in the book is that oftentimes, because Dutch wax textiles are manufactured in Europe, they're often thought of as non-African, and a lot of people have been pushing against using these textiles because they're not African. And I argue against this by showing the ways that these textiles, the aesthetics of these textiles, came from African women's intellectual production. They were the ones who worked with European manufacturers in order to tailor these textiles to suit African tastes, because these textiles were actually originally made in Indonesia. When the Dutch went to Indonesia, they saw the manufacturing of these textiles, tried to mimic them. It didn't work for European consumers, but African consumers, particularly African women in these market spaces, worked with European manufacturers to design these textiles to fit the aesthetic taste of African consumers. So they're absolutely African cultural products, and we should think of them as such, and we should think of them as a product of African women's intellectual production.
Thank you. And just for the benefit of our audience now and the recorded audience, the live streaming audience, before we jump to Touria, would you mind sharing a little bit about Adire and like some of the indigo processing that was indigenous in the space before even the encounter with the Dutch traders?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I don't work on Adire and the indigenous textiles in the region. I think more explicitly about the 20th century when Dutch wax textiles become a really powerful medium of communication and trade. There are a lot of other scholars, particularly in the Nigerian context, that do a lot of really good work in that, but if I begin to speak about that, I'll be speaking outside my area of expertise, and there's a lot of people online who will probably be very upset.
I'll not push you out of your area of expertise, but in the context of this like broader conversation, as we think about the relationship between craft, ancestral legacy, and aesthetics, I just wanted to lift up that there were these sort of deeply rooted practices of using indigo dye that were exported from West Africa to the rest of the world, and then also thinking about the reason it was resonant from these Indonesian to Dutch global trade networks is because there was actually already this sort of aesthetic tradition throughout West Africa. So.
Absolutely, yeah. So the ways, when I was talking about the fact that these West African women merchants were able to work with European manufacturers to make these textiles more resonant for African consumers, they were building on the indigenous textile aesthetics that were already available and kind of translating that into the Dutch wax medium. So you're absolutely right in that the aesthetics came from a much longer tradition that is rooted in indigenous textile production on the African continent.
Thank you, Marius. And on that, I actually want to come to Omar next, if you don't mind. So, excuse me. Omar describes Sukena, the label, as culturally rooted in the cosmologies of Africa, the aesthetics of Europe, and the canvas of reinvention that is America. So I feel like it's the perfect bridge from talking about the Nana Bends of post-independence Togo to thinking about what does cosmology, African cosmology, mean for you today, and like, how does that express itself in fashion, and how do you think about yourself positioned in these like global networks of art and influence and power?
Hi. Thank you, Dr. Precious, for creating this very important and necessary space for us to get to speak our voice from the motherland in this incredible platform that is being opened by another incredible person who has supported some of the trajectory of Sukaina with Shirma and Anna. So we are super happy and honored to be here. The African cosmology for us is the ability in this world where the fashion industry, with all that it entails of complication and directions and deliverables, and it's a really, really robust machine, really take it all the way back to the root of where it all started from. Long before the internet made it possible for us to sit here and have a conversation that at the four corners of the world and at Harvard people are partaking, Africa has spoken about the circle of life. It's not just a great Lion King song, it's something that we always lived by and believed in. And in everything Africa has done already then, this is going back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, there was always this dignity and ability to pick up one thing, knowing that that thing is connecting to all things. And I love to talk about what the fashion industry has become, but for me, I feel that the part that we tend to not talk about is where it started from, which was really as simple as someone picking cotton, looming it into a thread, weaving it into a cloth that became a piece of garment. So love has been throughout that whole genesis what really was the intention behind it. So I'm not as good at talking about the fashion industry as I feel that it's more my calling to talk about the fashion heart story. Someone must have loved someone to want to clothe them or support them or assist them and make them shine based on the way they gazed at that person. And who knew that that could lead into what the fashion industry is today. I think this very strong African belief must somehow be true, because as we grow, as we develop, we are realizing that love is really that root and that seed that can really be the guiding light through it. And at Sukaina, that is our force and our compass. And each single woman that we are working with, we try to make it a singular, personal, intimate interaction that is unique in itself, because what we are there to do is to really look at this woman and say, how can we love you efficiently? How can we highlight you in a way that even for a second can put you in a trance where that voice that is unique to you can be spoken, can be shouted in a way that only you can. And I think in that sense, Africa, hopefully, can play a role in this super, super, super powerful industry where this is what we've always believed. And it has inspired designers from John Galliano at Dior to Riccardo Tisci at Givenchy to many, many, many other designers. And I think while the adornment and the visual of it was striking and interesting enough to inspire, there is still some more work to do in really going a bit deeper and not only look at what Africa is and has been, but where do we create from? What is it that about Africa and its creation is still so vibrating and so incredibly transcending of time that it has moved so many people from around the world, and without knowing, without being able to pinpoint where it was coming from, still is something that is a pole that people seem to be interested in, whether it is in music, in architecture, or in artifacts. So talking about the love thread in fashion, take it all the way back in Africa. We just wanted to be this brand or this fashion house where, even though trained in Paris between Cedres-Grenelle and the Saint-Germain and working out of Brooklyn in New York, we wanted to make sure that in everything that we do, we wanted to hold super, super proud that we create the way ancient Africans have in the past.
Oh, thank you so much. And what you say, I hear this sort of powerful rejection of the fast fashion consumption mentality and really thinking about fashion as a mutual expression of love, not just the self-love and how we clothe ourselves, how we conceive of our own self-expression in the world, but actually the role of the designer, the sewer, the seamstress in that family. And so that's really profound and has a lot to teach us, I think, about sustainability and cultivating an ecosystem of fashion and expression that rises above to this level of cosmology, right? That rises above the, like, what can I buy today off the rack? Touria, I want to come to you because one of the things that sort of brings this all together, but then also sort of pushes at the seams, if you'll forgive me the pun, is the relationship between art and fashion, the relationship between contemporary African art and some of the traditions that are rooted in kind of craftsmanship and artisanal techniques. And there's so much that's happening in the contemporary art world. How do you see fashion from Africa kind of in dialogue with art that's being made from Africa, and then these like massive global cosmopolitan forces of consumption and luxury and wealth that kind of shoot through that but are somehow not entirely related to its creative process?
So it's interesting because the two industries are very different in many ways, because the rhythms are different, the cycles are different, and but I think if you go into the story, the energy that contemporary artists are bringing are very fluid to the fashion world. There's artists that have worked with different fabrics, pop culture trends, and they make amazing photographies. And this is where the line is very blur. We have a project coming up next week in our edition with a brand called Art Come First, and basically it's a fashion brand, but they are doing a project at 154 that explore textile and what the textile is saying, basically, in terms of legitimacy, story, and probably rebellion at the same time. And I think for contemporary African artists, in general, which is exactly my area of expertise, I can say that the path of success has been similar to, fashion designer, path of success as well, except that we don't have a Dr. Precious, with us as a patrons of the art yet, that might, multiply, let's say, or support, a lot of the creation we have in Africa. But we are very distinctive in the fact that, we are talking about, saying stories of all those artists, and a lot of the galleries and the artists we've been working with in the past that, have a very fluid relationship with fashion have often been completely ignored or excluded from, the global art market. So I think where, we are maybe different in terms of rhythm, I think some of the stories are the same, and what we're trying to say are, saying, story of visibility, of legitimacy, but also, the commercial aspect is very important, to what we do. I mean, for me, I've seen in the past, artists, navigating both worlds, very easily, and even more so today. We have great collaboration that are taking place between artists and fashion brands. We've seen unbelievable artists working with Dior. You have Billy Zengewa, who did a super collaboration with her textile, works, and she was, I think, trained into the fashion before getting into becoming, an artist. But all the artists I know that are working today that are, I would say, unique. And this is also what is very important, is I think really breaking those silos about what is fashion, what is art, because at the end of the day, there's works that might be more into fashion or design, but shouldn't be fitted in a traditional category, but still need to be part of the discussion. It doesn't matter if they're part of the fashion world or part of the art world. It's just they need to be part of the conversation. And I think this is what artists, I think, and I consider a lot of the fashion designer artists, to be honest. So for me, I'm part of this world, even if we're not doing the fashion shows, and know the production of creativity and what comes out of creative people in general. And I think the more those collaborations are fluid, I think the world is gaining, in many ways, in terms of what we see, what the artists are being able to do. And I think fashion, in a way, has, I hate to talk about the commerce of it, but had always had more money than the contemporary art world in Africa. And I think for a lot of artists today, you see them doing amazing collaborations, with the fashion world. And I think this is where we see that, a lot of the fashion brands see, contemporary art being completely fluid with fashion.
Amazing, thank you. So as we soon pass the baton to the fashion, I wanted to just ask David to please close us out with sort of this 21st century vision of Afro Dandyism. What would we expect to see in terms of fashion from Africa shaping the rest of the world? And what do you think Africa has to say for the Met theme on Monday? Not to be too provocative.
I think, first of all, I appreciate that, the Met Gala is celebrating dandyism, and I think it's about time that, the world embraces the beauty that comes from Africa and all over the world, and also because all these things that we do, they don't only come from Africa, like Omar said, we produce everywhere in the world, but it all comes from the heart. And our hearts as African creatives, artists, are yet to be witnessed to the world on Monday and going forward. And I believe there's been so much work that has been done out of Africa, in Europe, in America, anywhere else. I think Monday is going to be a testament of that journey that started a long time ago and being celebrated on a bigger platform. And my heart's desire or prayer is that post this celebration of dandyism and everything else, is that we start uniting as an industry. It don't matter whether you come from Africa, from Europe, America, we start uniting and celebrating talent for what it is. Because when we create, we don't create for just an African client. We create pieces for human beings. And human beings are so special. They see, they love, they pull up the credit card and they spend. It don't matter where it comes from. So I wish that post Monday, the industry unites. We start supporting one another, not for us, but for generations to come. And our children's children to benefit from this journey that we are walking on today. And also taking on the baton from the likes of Panelist, Dr. Precious, Chioma, and everyone else, and Anna Winter, and everyone else, to say, let us create the world of fashion that we want to see. Nelson Mandela has always said, you need to be the change that you want to see. We are the greatest answers to what we are hoping for. So post Monday, it is our responsibility to support and believe and also invest in this gigantic industry that can unite the world. Politics come and go, inflation come and go, but tomorrow morning we need clothes.
Thank you so much. please join me in thanking again Harvard University Center for African Studies, Africa Fashion International, Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe, Chioma Nadi, and all of you beautiful people for being here this afternoon. Let's look at some fashion.